Hello and welcome to this episode of Star Revelations with the gorgeous Maria Jones and myself, Morgana Sophia. Maria, welcome. It's wonderful to connect with you again.
Yeah, we've been having a very interesting conversation as always, haven't we?
Yeah, sometime one day we'll to record what we say before we start the show because we go so deep sometimes.
Absolutely. We're jumping ahead to Chiron and Taurus this morning, aren't we? But more about that later.
Horses for next year. So we thought today we would really share with you on the podcast the incoming Mercury retrograde in Leo and have a little chat around the Saturn and Neptune retrogrades that are kind of marking our summer as a space of introspection and reflection. We're always in retrograde. I remember you and I did a podcast about 2 years ago about a summer of retrogrades. It's like the podcast that keeps on giving these summer retrogrades.
Absolutely. I think, every year we go through this period, don't we? It seems to be the astrological cycle that most of the major planets are retrograde throughout the summer months. And of course, some of these larger planets are going to spend around 40% of their time in retrograde anyway. That's something that we are used to, and a lot of people will have that in their natal chart as well. It's quite common. But what is really interesting is when we think about the cycles of the inner planets, because we were just thinking about this Mercury retrograde in Leo. And of course, this is kind of the third Leo retrograde that we've had recently. Obviously, Mars at the beginning of the year spent a long, long time in Leo, a little bit in Cancer, but a lot of its retrograde was in Leo. And, the year before that, the summer of 2023, we had the big Venus retrograde in Leo. So wherever Leo is in your chart, there's been a lot of activity, a lot of processing. But what is always interesting to me when I think about these cycles is that, we're very focused on this Aquarian energy. Obviously, we've got Pluto lingering around in the early degrees of Aquarius, which is always on my mind because it's my Pluto square. Only a few more months to go for us, eh? Only a few more months to go. But we're focusing a lot on this Aquarian energy. And of course, Leo is the balancing polarity. Aquarius is the web, the ether, the oneness of humanity. And Leo is me, myself, the solar identity. Who am I? It's a fellow fire sign to Aries, where, we have the retrogrades, which we shall not speak of earlier in the year. Everybody wants to forget March and April.
Pretty much.
Never to be spoken of again. But it's a fellow fire sign, and both Aries and Leo are very much about self-identity. Obviously, the sun rules over Leo, it's exalted in Aries. So again, these retrogrades are very much about who am I? What do I want? Yeah. And with Leo, it's very much that creative self-expression, whereas Aries is, first fire, I'm starting things. We've got obviously Neptune and Saturn retrograding in Aries very soon. But Leo is like creative fire, fixed fire, sustainable fire. Leo is that sign of sovereignty. It's Sekhmet's sign. So I feel like with this Mercury retrograde in Leo, and also, Urania just gone into Gemini, the sign of the throat chakra, there's a big, activation around this energy of speaking my truth, which we know can be a bit of a double-edged sword. So,
It's
yes.
a minefield, isn't it? You speak your truth and then you reap the kind of reaction. I think that's got a lot worse, particularly if we express our opinion, on social media. Back in the day, you'd express your opinion, in the local pub, and that would be it. Now you are this 24-hour constant kind of judge face from everybody. And I always find Leo a really fascinating sign. I always see it very much as, the one on the stage, the kind of the Eugene who everybody adores. But this Mercury retrograde in Leo for me is this kind of, actually, there's going to be some really loud voices, but I keep seeing everyone's back turning on them because it's too much, it's too loud, it's too bold, it's too expressive. And that is a fine line, isn't there, from expressing your true truth and doing it for kind of shock and awe, and to gain followers or to rile up another kind of sect or polarity. And that's what I'm kind of finding. It's this balance of being seen and speaking your truth, but not being so loud that actually you're creating division, but not being so quiet that actually you're too low key and you're missing your voice being heard by others. I think it's a real tightrope that we are going to be walking over those 3 years, thinking, on the global stage of some of the key players who are quite charismatically vocal, shall we say.
Certain person in particular with a Mars and Leo rising.
A Gemini too.
Absolutely. So we can expect a bit more chaos, I think. But yeah, I think it's really interesting, isn't it? Because people do often create provocative posts or share provocative opinions in order to maybe gain followers or expand reach. It's become a very common tactic, isn't it? It's that law of polarization. So I think, with the shadow of Leo, there can be a lot of pride, there can be a lot of hubris. So it's, really is, what I am sharing coming from that space of authenticity, my genuine, humble, creative expression? Or is it, I want to be seen, I want to be the best, everybody listen to me, which we obviously see a lot of in our, world leaders. And yeah, well, Leo is the sign of celebrity, hey?
Well, absolutely. And that for me kind of goes into a bit of our earlier conversation about kind of spiritual celebrities and spiritual narcissism as well. And for me, we've got this Mercury retrograde. Mercury, of course, is all about communication, expression, our voice. But we've also got Neptune retrograding as well, which is kind of stripping away the illusion and the delusion. I've really enjoyed Neptune being in Aries. I found it too dreamy in Pisces, but actually it's really stripped away and almost kind of like ripping a sticking plaster off, and is really exposing some of these louder voices which are genuinely thinking that they're sharing, but they're actually just kind of creating polarity and provocation, which hasn't been very harmonious for us all as a collective as well. So I think it's going to be really interesting that the celebrities that come out on the world stage, whether it's political, through entertainment, in the spiritual world in which we kind of float interestingly, I think there's going to be a lot of shifts and a lot of, I'm hoping, peaceful calling out. So the most peaceful way of calling someone out is to unfollow them and not kind of, integrate with them, not communicate with them. But I do feel that this, and I see it every Mercury retrograde, there's just someone who really enjoys putting the lighted match on the kind of the petrol that has been poured. Someone is firing the silver bullets, and it feels almost as if there's going to be some exposure on some level somewhere that really tips the balance into what we see, we feel, we hear, and we ultimately believe.
Well, Mercury, has been opposite Pluto as well during this kind of shadow period. And this is really the first Mercury retrograde we will be experiencing with Saturnia and Neptunia so close together. So it is really, we've talked about this on previous podcasts, that kind of disillusionment and exposure and, glamour and idealization that is, happening at this time. And I think a really kind of classic example of that is, as we're speaking today, currently in the news, we've got this whole denial now around the Epstein files. There was that whole thing of, oh, the list is going to be exposed and this and that. And now it's like, oh, there is no list. And people, put a lot of faith and attention and energy into voting people into power, hoping that they would expose these things.
And
So
while
for
we're
me,
all
this is a
watching that, what
classic
else is
example.
happening? While we're being distracted by the Epstein files, what else is happening elsewhere?
Well, we've got the AI takeover in full swing, haven't we, going on
Oh, naturally.
with the other things that are passing through, the other bills and things that are passing through. So it's all smoke and mirrors, and that's the Neptune way. But she's not so easily getting away with it with Saturn on her back at the moment. So it's very hard for these people to continue in the way that they always have. And, this is what I was speaking to a little bit recently, is the fact that, the transits we're undergoing now, astrologically, they're all tied back to cycles, but we are now in a different aeon. So we're responding to things and experiencing things in a very different way. So, we talked a lot about Urania in Gemini, and yeah, last time that happened, there were significant historical events, but it was a different aeon. Now we're living in technological times, so our experience of these transits is something quite different. And I feel like we're all trying to navigate this new reality, this kind of new dimension that we find ourselves in, because the world is a very different place from 5 years ago. So, now we've got these retrogrades coming in. It's kind of that reflection, reevaluation, where am I at? Where am I going? As this new energy unfolds, what is true for me now? Because it's very hard to define them.
Absolutely. And for me, on a personal level, it has been over the past few months of really what is my truth? Who and what do I align to? And I think we're seeing that rippling out, not just personally, but also in the collective. And if you really reflect back on the last 5 years, I mean, think what has changed. You and I were very much talking about how we would normally gather in person and be on the land, but actually in this new technological age, we are now able to connect to people. We could do it before, but people want to connect online. They want to connect through screens. They don't necessarily want to interact in that kind of one-to-one level. So I think it's going to be this fascinating kind of walk of how much do we do online? How much do we rely on this increasing AI technology? I know we spoke about this earlier when I was asked earlier this week, and someone said, "Well, can't you do all your astrology readings and just put it into an AI bot and it can produce it for you, so you can do more readings within a week?" And I went, "No, that isn't how it works. That for me completely cuts off one, who I am, two, my intuition, and three, the channel that both you and I have to Goddess. Because when we're doing readings, we're not just reading off a script, we are really allowing her to come through and really allowing that intuitive side to come through. So I think that there's a real shift and change. And where do we draw the line? We always end up coming back to AI, don't we? How far are we going to let the technology take over our lives?
And how much control do we have over it? Because
Well,
that is definitely intention of the powers that be, right? So
Absolutely.
I think for all of us, it's a personal choice as to how much we are going to engage with it. And I think during these times, there is an element of remembering those lifetimes before at the turnings of the aeons, and particularly in Egyptian times, which is very leonine. But it's really that energy of how do we preserve these mysteries in this new aeon? You know, how if people are going to be using AI for
Mm.
oracular advice, if people are no longer reading books, if people are no longer going out on the land to connect with the ancestors, you know, how this is the question I'm asking myself, and I don't have any answers. But how do we continue to preserve these mysteries? Because whatever happens, with whichever age we are living through, there are always those of us which will hold the thread,
Mm.
which will remember Goddess, which will remember the magic. And, you know, some lifetimes we might have even died for that. I had a very strong memory of that out on the land, of a lifetime where that happened to me recently, up on Dragon Hill, actually, out in Oxfordshire, which we'll be visiting in the summer. But many of us will have these memories, you know, of these
Absolutely.
lifetimes and these cycles. So it's like, how do we ensure that these teachings are carried forward? Because, yeah, technologically, if we carry on, we'll probably end up, you know, experiencing a lot of destruction.
I absolutely agree, and it's we welcome all comments below the podcast of how
Yeah.
we can really do this, because I think there's several ways. One, obviously, there'll always be physically printed books for a while longer, so obviously we'll be well, we hope, but we're leaving that. I mean, you and
Mm,
I are leaving a digital footprint through our podcast, through our writings as well. But how then do we pass on the knowledge that we've got? You know, do we do it the traditional way of sitting in circle, or actually do we bring some of that online, embrace some of that technology, and initiate people through the screen essentially? For me, knowing the work that we are going to do, that's, you know, part of what we do, but there will be some magic in meeting still in person on the land, but not necessarily on the land where we expect to go sometimes. But it's very tricky, and I don't think there is an answer yet as how do we preserve all the knowledge that we have without it being lost, without it being subsumed, without me just going into Chat GPT and saying, tell me about Ariane, tell me about X, Y, and Z. You know, it probably could. But is that really the truth? You know, where's it getting its information from? Because it isn't from us, is
mm,
it? Who knows? You know, is it reading our Facebook posts and kind of taking them? But it is a very, very difficult question because we are going to need mystery schools still. In fact, more now than ever. So how do we leave that legacy for generations to come? I can't answer that question either.
mm. And I think it's about adaptability. It's about adapting to the times, but not forgetting, you know, the lineages past, and the, you know, the amazing women that have done the work in previous aeons, and the women that have devoted their life to the remembrance of Goddess in this lifetime. You know, with things like the Goddess Temple in Glastonbury. You know, without which, you know, none of us would be here really having these discussions, or I certainly wouldn't be. So it's, you know, how do we continue this work, while adapting to the incoming currents?
Mm.
And this is what our ancestors would have had to do.
Yeah.
You know, many of us will have many lifetimes where we remember, you know, rushing, you know, with sacred objects or sacred texts, and, you know, hiding them away, or, you know, gathering in secret and, you know, teaching and transmitting. these truths that, you know, since the beginning of time, the system has tried to suppress, you know, which is another very mercurial thing, isn't it? Where we've all been silenced.
Mm.
So I think, you know, what was coming to me as we were just talking about that was, you know, what maybe the imprint we leave is the imprint of our consciousness, you know, it's the astral imprint that we leave that can then be accessed, you know.
You kind of you're kind of talking about that, and I'm thinking about the women who have gone before us and have kind of almost passes the baton to continue with their work. It's about that imprint. I was going back and reading a lot of Dion Fortune over the weekend, actually. Psychic self-defense. It felt really relevant over the weekend.
Interesting.
Quite. But it's that imprint. It's not just as you're reading the book, it's actually feeling that energy, actually stepping forward to those of us who are really receptive to kind of take up the mantle, take up the baton. And you're right, it is the etheric imprint that we leave, the astral imprint is going to be so much more important, which is why it's important that you and I and those who come around us, you know, really hone into our own personal practices, our own magical practices to really strengthen that imprint that's left. Because, you know, I don't know about you, but I'd love people to be able to walk into this house where I am, you know, in 100 years' time and go, whoa, I can feel that. I can really feel that
Mm.
etheric imprint. So I think you're right. And I think that for me is honing down the key for this year and always is really focusing in on our personal practices, focusing in on our magical practices and those moments in time where we're really anchoring into the frequency of whatever is going on the in the external, that we're back in the that internal space, practicing and holding that energy.
Absolutely, because I think, you know, that's the key to understanding everything is everything starts in the astral, everything starts in imagination, everything starts in the sphere of the moon, you know, the emotional psychic realm, which is why the moon gets such a bad rap as well. Sometimes in more patriarchal spiritual teachings, one of the students, we were having a bit of a discussion. I think maybe you saw this in the spiral group as well, as someone was asking about the moon, which started a discussion about Gurdjieff and the kind of moon food theory, because, you know, there are some teachings which, you know, claim that the moon is a kind of darker entity or a darker energy. Um, but that is because I think these very masculine teachings did not understand the power of emotion and the power of cycles, you know, and you'll see a lot of this, you know, in the online space now as well, where it's solar Christ consciousness, you know, that's it, you know, moon is bad, moon cycles are bad, they'll keep you stuck in the matrix, you know, this kind of thing. And again, you know, it's all fear. It's fear of the shadows, it's fear of the darkness, it's fear of the undercurrents, which is really the realm of the goddess. So, you know, in many ways, you know, um, she's not just the light, bright full moon, is she? She's the dark moon. She's the sickle moon. She's you know, the crone and the mother and the maiden. So it's again, it's, you know, it's really interesting to see how there is this kind of overlay of different types of spirituality, which always tends towards the same
Mm.
um, rejection of the dark feminine, which, you know, Lilith in Scorpio is not having any of it, is she?
It's quite funny enough because once we finish recording today, I'm actually giving a Lilith reading. So, and looking at the dark goddess within someone's chart. So, kind of really prevalent. But thinking about this kind of patriarchal idea of the moon and moon food, and that the moon
Mm,
is, you know, an outpost for whatever, you know, nefarious deeds. It's quite interesting because depending on which rabbit hole you go down, there was someone who's well known was moaning that they couldn't see the moon at night. Well, any astronomer will tell you why you can't see the moon at night, but no, that meant it was because it was a space station and it had been cloaked. I mean, please, it was a man. Can we just get a little bit of a grip and understand not only the astrology, but also the astronomy of what goes on the moon cycles? Because she is constantly vilified as the moon. But what I've also found is how much Saturnia, Lady Saturnia, is also vilified as well in kind of black arts and black cube worship and Saturnia. But actually, we have to remember that Saturn also has a lighter side as well, that we can't get dragged into these rabbit holes where it says moon bad, Saturn bad, some good. That's essentially what it boils down to. And that is just so, I don't even know this is an English word, unnuanced, that actually it's kind of affecting the consciousness. So you can be awake, but if you're going down these rabbit holes of theories that planetary goddesses are bad, then actually you're still stuck in the matrix because it's the matrix still feeding you the fear to keep you stuck. And actually, maybe we do need to move away from solar pristic consciousness, that's the new one, and actually realize that it's all equal, it's all an experience, and we must embrace the shadow. We can't leave it because if we leave it, we too are left behind.
Absolutely. And it's interesting that these are the two planets that get the baddest rap, isn't it? Because these are the things that people like to reject. The moon, the emotions, the psychic realm, and Saturn, which is, Saturn is matrix, matter, mother. She's Bina, she's the feminine sphere on the tree of life, right? So this is always really interesting to me because you can't deny Saturn when you are bound to the earthly realm. We are all here on the earthly realm with Saturnian laws to abide by, which, before the advent of patriarchy, which Saturn can also be associated with, would have been more natural laws, laws of time and space. She is the great chronicator, the mistress of time and space, but now it's, become symbolic of the black cube and this and that. So it again, it's a turning away, isn't it, from things that people don't like to look at.
Absolutely. Yeah, a massive turning away. So my advice is be careful what rabbit hole you go down and what really resonates with your heart and truth, because you can go down some really weird places with Saturn. That's all I'm going to say. Really. But we have to embrace her. We have to learn that actually she isn't bad. There's many ways of acting. And there's good and bad, let's be honest. Yeah, it's good and evil within the world. You can choose to manipulate energy for evil, you can choose to use it for good. So actually, you need to really be discerning about what you're reading. Read as much as you want, but what really resonates with your heart truth. Yes, there are some pretty dark things that go on, but actually, on the other side, there's other ways of countering them by actually embracing the higher aspects, the higher frequencies of what you're being shown is bad, is my view. So Saturn has a very high frequency. Is the chronicator. I love that word, by the way. I just absolutely love it. But we need to embrace her higher frequencies as well, and not just the black cube worshipping. It's all bad. It's the black sun. Is it? Is it really? Is my question to those of you who believe that.
The void womb of creation, isn't it? In the tree of life, Bina, Babylon, the great womb from which we are all birthed. Saturn has always been a feminine energy. So again, it's interesting that it now has these connotations. And I think the things to reflect on really is, do we really want to live with the belief that we are living in a prison matrix planet and there is no hope and everything is terrible? Because there are many things that we can enjoy, when we're here on Earth as well. There are, it's always said there are a lot of souls that are waiting for a physical body. Yeah. So I think that's also something to reflect on when we go down these certain types of rabbit holes. And the other thing is, all energy can be drawn on for magical purposes. all planetary energy, all natural energy. And it is just the will of the magician or the sorceress that directs that energy flow, right? So if we come back to Mercury in Leo, which is a very creative force, what are we creating? With our mercurial words and thoughts, what are we creating into being, with the way that we express ourselves, with the artworks that we create? I was thinking about Promethea again. We had a little discussion about this. I was listening to a podcast by Carolyn, who we both study a lot with, and she was talking about the graphic novel by Alan Moore, which is entitled Promethea, and has very Uranian, Aquarian connotations. Obviously it's the feminized name of Prometheus, who is Uranus, who stole fire from the gods, mythologically. But what's always really fascinating to me from a mercurial point of view about these novels is that in, every generation, a Promethea awakens within the collective consciousness of humanity. And the way that she becomes Promethea is that she writes it into being. She writes herself as Promethea, as an invocation. And it just reminds me very much of the power of, reshaping reality with words or with art, with painting, or rearranging the space around you. Or, with Leo, it can be very much about reworking your appearance and how you present yourself. Leo has a lot to do with ritual adornment and beauty. Leo is that very kind of Cleopatra sovereign kind of energy too. It's quite Hathorian in a way, So it's like we can change things about ourselves by manipulating energy. It's a little bit of glamour magic maybe, but as you recreate yourself, your identity, through writing or changing your appearance, you're actually restructuring your future. Yeah, does that make sense? You're restructuring, you're becoming something new by taking these magical acts.
And this is what I love. I totally get that. And this, for me, just segueing slightly, is what is missing when we start on the path and we start reading The Secret and we start reading all these manifesting tools. Actually, it completely misses the point. It doesn't go deeper. Oh, yeah, just say this invocation. But actually, it's about will, isn't it? It's about creating the magic yourself. It's about every morning waking up and stepping, as you and I both do, obviously, into our CEO boss girl energy of, this is who we are, this is what's going to go on today, this is how I feel. But Magick takes it much deeper than what I would call the golden platitudes of basic manifestation, because it's kind of teaching you magic, but it's not really teaching you the foundations. It's not really teaching you the structure. It's just like, oh, write an affirmation and it'll happen. It doesn't. It's much deeper than that. It's about your own will, your own sovereignty. And it takes me back when you were chatting actually to kind of Newton, I'm sure it's one of Newton's laws of motion, but energy is neither created nor destroyed. It just changes from form to form. You have all this energy inside you. So are you going to write a golden platitude of, well, today I'm going to manifest a Ferrari? Or actually, are you go? I'd love. Well, actually, no, I prefer an Aston Martin if I'm really honest. Um, Petrol head. What can I say? But actually, or is it I am? I am a magician. I am the CEO. I am embodying this in every single movement. I am writing this into being. I am constantly rewiring my neural pathways. I'm calling the energy in. There's a huge difference. I would say it was subtle, but it's not, is it? It's not golden easy. This is really deep work, and actually finding your true will, kind of bending reality to create the reality you want, is a deep magical act, which is sort of being glossed over for the shininess of what you could have. And for you, and I don't know about you, but whenever we're kind of pulling that energy into being, we still have to go through the shadow, the dark night of the soul of who am I to do this? But who are you not to do that? Who are you not to become the person that you are meant to be becoming? And that kind of goes into kind of true will, doesn't it? What is your true will in this life? And getting in touch with your holy guardian angel, which we really must change the name of. Quite like that, but your starfire soul self maybe, but it's a real deep work to actually start to um become and change the reality. It's not soft, fluffy, glittery, unicorns, is it? It's deep work.
Absolutely. And I think that's the power of magic, is it changes you into becoming the person that can receive what you're asking for. If you're trying to manifest a Ferrari, but you feel completely unworthy, or, it's kind of what is within reach and what is out of reach as well. You can't go from, having a deep scarcity consciousness overnight to becoming a millionaire. It takes that deep self-worth. And, that's Leo, self-worth and receiving and deserving, all of that, that's a very leonine frequency. So it's something that we can all reflect on during these retrogrades. But also it's kind of knowing, I think is the key to magic, is knowing that you are worthy without these things. Yeah, why do you feel you need this or that, or to be, have this many followers, and all of this kind of spiritual glamour and illusion? If you really feel centered in yourself, you don't need that stuff. Yeah,
Agreed.
you don't
You
need
don't
it.
need the I love the fact of spiritual glamour. We don't need it. The strongest magic that I've ever performed is often in the morning in my dressing gown, doing my LBRP and really feeling that energy and feeling my self-worth
Mm.
is far more important than going and having the spiritual glamour, the spiritual fripperies, having to have the latest, I don't know, what do people collect these days, crystal, or going to buy a new wand or something. It is about you and that kind of self-worth aspect, which is like, oh, Chiron in Taurus, it's coming up next year for many of
Mhm.
us. But it's you are so worthy. And actually the fripperies are what we're told to manifest. Truly, we should actually be manifesting self worth first and doing that work. And then that allows us to be in that state of receipt. And to be quite honest, if you do want the Ferrari, that's fine. But have you been? What colour do you want it in? Do you want it in red or another colour? How much does it cost? There's a lot more work than having it just on a vision board. This is about, you're right, it's about worth. And actually, your magical practice shows how worthy you are. And then from that foundation, you then go and build. And you go and build your empire because that's how magic works.
Absolutely. It is that kind of center vision. And then the structure of Saturn, it's the imagination of the moon and the structure of Saturn, in
Yeah.
many ways, and we're talking just as the Capricorn full moon is building as well. So I'm just thinking, I think that's why Saturn and the moon are kind of sneaking into the podcast today. So it's me with a Capricorn moon in my
Will be
natal
released just
chart.
as Mercury goes retrograde. So perfect.
Absolutely. So yeah, it really all comes back to, who do you want to be? What is that astral imprint that you are creating and encoding within your being? And I think it's,
Mm.
the key is always to have devotion to something outside of yourself or your own ego desires, isn't it? Because that's the other thing. It's like, oh, I feel better when I've got this. When I've done this, when I've received this, when I look like this, when I've manifested this, blah, 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 when I've got a relationship, blah, 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 we can go on forever in this feeling of not enoughness or dissatisfaction.
Mm.
But ultimately, those things that we accumulate around us will only satisfy us for so long. And then we will desire something else, because desire is the life force, and there is a place within yourself that can enjoy that feeling of wanting. as well. You know, that's kind of an existential king practice from Carolyn as well. But there is a part of us that is always wanting.
Absolutely. And how comfortable can you be if, for I've just sat at my desk now and I've got about 6 crystals on my desk, is how comfortable would I be if they were swept away? You know, having is evidence of wanting. So, you know, it's very much about actually coming back into yourself, isn't it? Really coming back into that essence and power of who you are, and not diving onto the next trend or having to have, well, we've both got a lot of crystal skulls, but I know we've got loads. I've got Clive here as well. But you know, not having to oh, it's beautiful. Oh, you can't see this if you're listening on the audio, but there is the most beautiful skull, just oh my god. Hashtag well gel. You know, I might want that myself, but it is about stop searching for the next external materialistic thing. This is going to bring you joy and happiness. But actually, what is going to bring you joy and happiness now? And if you're in that energy of wanting something beyond that and not feeling worthy of it, go and do your magical practice. Go and reclaim your energy back for yourself, she says, now drooling at that particular crystal skull.
Oh, I have to bring her. You can meet her next time we're in person. And yeah, if Bee's listening, lovely Bee, who used to work in the crystal shop with me, she knows which skull that is. But yeah, I think that's the thing, isn't it? It's that constant searching outside of yourself for something to make you feel better. You know, I'll be happy when, I'll be happy when. But you'll never be happy if you live in that state, you know.
Never.
So
No.
there is the message of Mercury and Leo.
Which I feel segues us quite nicely onto just having a little bit of a chat about September and what we are bringing through as regards to magical practices. So I will just give a quick overview and you can jump in. So on September, we are going to take you through the 7 planetary spheres of magic, 7 planets of magic, so astrological magic for the Aquarian Aeon. So it's going to be a course where both of us will be teaching you, sharing our knowledge, sharing our wisdom, sharing magical practices with you. I'm really, really excited about it. This very much kind of birthed itself as we were talking about the women of the Golden Dawn. And ever since we started talking about it, you know, for me, particularly, goddesses, you know, being tapping us both on the shoulder saying, please do this, get on with it. I'm really excited, Maria. Are you?
It feels like a very powerful natural phase of evolution. Because when you work with the star goddess, when you work with astrology, you learn astrology, it's an amazing tool for knowing yourself, for understanding yourself, for the embodiment of archetypes. And then the next layer of that is magic. You know, astrology and magic have always been interchangeable, and Ariane Rod herself often refers to herself as the Lady of High Magic. And I think once you have that understanding of who you are, the next phase in your journey, especially for this Aquarian Aeon, is to become the creatrix of that reality. And you know, that is where magical practice comes in. And that is what has, you know, what has changed my life in so many ways. So I think this combination of astrology and magic is what we need for this Pluto in Aquarius transit, and the other astrological cycles that are unfolding at the moment as well, because we've got this Urania in Gemini now also bringing forward these ancient futuristic mysteries. So it's very important for us, I think, to kind of hold these threads and bring them through.
Yes. Agreed. And it is going to be really, really brilliant. So we start on the 25th of September. We'll put all the details in the show notes. But if you'd like to join the UK's leading goddess-centric mystery school, then you would be more than welcome. It's going to be really, really exciting to delve a lot deeper into the magical sphere. Maria, it's been a pleasure as always. Thank you.
It's been very fun. I'm always amazed at what happens. I had no notes, no thoughts this morning.
I always love how we go off to wherever we need to go off to. We will see you all very, very soon on the next episode. But as always, just extending our huge gratitude and thanks for all the love and the support for the podcast. We have been absolutely blown away. And every time we get a comment, every time we get a subscriber or people messaging us, we're just really, really filled with so much gratitude for everything that you support us with. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
We will see you very soon. Take care. Lots of love. Goodbye.